So, Prince William has lawyered up against King Charles, not through intermediaries, not through palace aides, directly. And the reason is a single document that Queen Camilla's legal team quietly filed with the Office of the Privy Purse on the 14th of March. That document was a formal proposal to restructure the late Queen Elizabeth II's private estate trusts. The proposal would have extracted a 9-figure sum and placed it into a new, permanent, untouchable foundation controlled exclusively by Queen Camilla. William saw the paperwork. He activated a veto clause that nobody outside the family even knew existed. The proposal is now dead. The king is furious. The Queen Consort's office has gone silent. The promise was put in writing 6 months before the Queen died. On the 8th of March 2022, Her late Majesty held a private meeting at Windsor Castle with the then Prince of Wales and the Duke of Cambridge. The purpose was to finalize the governance structure of the undisclosed private trusts that hold the bulk of the Windsor family's personal wealth. The Queen's will transferred the 20,000-acre Sandringham estate and the 50,000-acre Balmoral estate directly to Charles, sovereign to sovereign, under the 1993 government agreement exempting such bequests from the 40% inheritance tax. That saved the king an estimated £148 million. But the private estate is different. It holds the Queen's personal investment portfolio, her art collection, her jewellery, her horses, and the liquid assets never part of the Crown estate or the duchies. That estate, valued at roughly £370 million, was placed into a series of discretionary trusts. The deed of settlement named 2 protectors. The first protector is the reigning monarch. The second protector is the heir apparent. The document states that any material alteration to the trust structure, any redistribution of principal, any change in beneficiary, any creation of a subsidiary fund requires the unanimous written consent of both protectors. The assets would flow to the direct line of succession: George, Charlotte, Louis. Not sideways, not into a new office created by a consort. That is the promise. The threat started the week after the coronation. Queen Camilla was crowned alongside Charles on the 6th of May 2023. She wore the modified Queen Mary's crown. She was anointed, but she controls no royal duchy of her own. The Duchy of Lancaster, valued at £654 million and generating around £24 million a year for the sovereign's privy purse, belongs to the monarch. When Charles dies, it passes instantly to William. The Duchy of Cornwall, worth over £1 billion and spanning 130,000 acres across 23 counties, belongs to the heir apparent. William received it the moment the Queen died and took its £24 million annual surplus that same day. Camilla has no equivalent. Her office is funded by the sovereign grant, a percentage of the Crown Estate's profits, currently £86.3 million for the 2023-24 financial year. That money is controlled by the Treasury and subject to parliamentary scrutiny. Camilla wanted a permanent, untouchable financial trust for her own legacy, something that would survive the king's death and keep her household, charitable foundation, and staff fully funded without interference from the next monarch. The only way to build that fund was to carve a piece out of the late Queen's private estate. Her legal team, led by the same London firm that handled the 2005 prenuptial agreement, drafted a 47-page restatement of the trust deed. It proposed a new subtrust called the Queen Consort's Legacy Fund. The fund would be seeded with a one-time transfer of £120 million from the principal of the Elizabeth II Private Estate Trust. It would then receive an annual top-up of 5% of the Duchy of Lancaster's net surplus, diverting roughly £1.2 million a year out of the privy purse and into Camilla's separate vehicle. The trustees would be three individuals hand-picked by Camilla. The protector of the new fund would be the current Queen Consort, and upon her death, the fund would convert into a perpetual charitable foundation bearing her name, with the King's Foundation as a primary beneficiary. The legal justification was that the Queen Consort's office requires long-term financial independence to fulfill its constitutional duties. The reality is that it would siphon the late Queen's accumulated wealth away from the direct line of succession and into a structure that Prince George would never touch. The proposal was hand-delivered to Sir Michael Stevens, the Keeper of the Privy Purse, on the 14th of March. Sir Michael manages the monarchy's private finances and has served under 3 sovereigns. He opened the file, read the first 5 pages, and immediately called William's private secretary at Kensington Palace. The deed requires the second protector's signature. Sir Michael knew that signature had not been obtained. To understand why William's response was so immediate, you have to look at how the Queen herself treated the private estate. Queen Elizabeth II inherited the bulk of her personal wealth from her father, King George VI, in 1952, tax-exempt under the same sovereign-to-sovereign agreement. She bought the Gatcombe Park estate for Princess Anne in 1976, acquired the Castle of May in Scotland in 1952 and restored it, built a global stock portfolio managed by Coutts and Cazenove, and owned a stamp collection valued at £100 million, a collection of Fabergé eggs, and a private fleet of thoroughbred racehorses. She never allowed a single pound of that estate to be diverted into a side fund. She was the protector of the Crown's private wealth, and she treated that role as a sacred trust. The numbers sharpen the point. The Duchy of Lancaster's annual surplus rose from £4.3 million in 1992 to £9.8 million in 2002, and to £24 million in the year of her death. The Crown Estate generated a net revenue profit of £442.6 million in the 2022-23 year, and the Treasury paid 25% of that, £110.6 million, into the sovereign grant. The grant was set at 15% until 2017, when it was temporarily raised to 25% to cover the £369 million reservicing of Buckingham Palace. That uplift expires in 2027. The Queen Consort's office drew £2.4 million of that grant in 2023-24 for its own running costs, a figure that would have been shielded inside the Legacy Fund, away from Treasury oversight and the Public Accounts Committee. The property valuations are concrete. Sandringham was appraised by Savills in 2014 at £250 million. Balmoral, with its 50,000 acres of highland estate, grouse moors and working forests, was valued at £150 million by the same firm in 2019. The Castle of May, purchased by the Queen Mother in 1952 and restored by the Queen at a cost of £2.4 million, was transferred to a charitable trust in 1996, but its contents, paintings, furniture, silver, remained in the Queen's private ownership and were last assessed at £18 million. The late Queen's jewellery collection, not part of the Crown Jewels, was catalogued by the Royal Collection Trust and appraised by Sotheby's in 2018 at £110 million, including the 22-carat Williamson pink diamond brooch, the Nizam of Hyderabad necklace, and the South Africa necklace of 21 graduated diamonds. The stamp collection, housed in more than 300 volumes, was described by the Royal Philatelic Society's 2002 valuation as the most comprehensive private collection of Great Britain and the Commonwealth ever assembled, with a then-market value of £100 million. Her bloodstock operation at the Royal Stud in Sandringham produced winners of the Ascot Gold Cup, the St. Leger, and the Oaks, and in the 2017 flat season alone returned £560,000 in prize money and a further £2.1 million in yearling sales at Tattersalls. These were managed assets, run with the discipline of a family office. The 1993 Memorandum of Understanding between the Palace and HM Treasury, signed by the then Keeper of the Privy Purse, Sir Michael Peat, and the Financial Secretary to the Treasury, stated in paragraph 12 that the private wealth of the sovereign shall pass intact to the next sovereign in the direct line of succession, free of inheritance tax, on the understanding that it shall not be alienated for the benefit of any person other than the sovereign or the heir apparent. That paragraph was drafted precisely to prevent the kind of sidecarve that Camilla's legacy fund proposed. The sovereign-to-sovereign exemption exists because the monarch's private wealth is supposed to pass intact to the next monarch, not to be fragmented by consort-side carve-outs. Camilla's plan was a direct violation, and the paper trail goes back further than the coronation. In 2005, when Camilla married Charles, a private agreement stipulated that she would receive a life interest in Clarence House and a generous annual allowance from the Duchy of Cornwall. It also said that any additional provision for her long-term security would be negotiated when Charles became king. Camilla's legal team is now pointing to that clause as the basis for the legacy fund, arguing that the king has a moral obligation to provide for his wife's independent financial future. But the late Queen's trust deed overrides any moral obligation. The deed is a legal instrument. It requires William's consent. Here is where the second threat comes in. King Charles did not expect William to block the restructuring. He assumed the heir apparent would fall in line. When the Privy Purse informed him that William's legal team had already filed a formal notice of objection, Charles convened a meeting at Sandringham on the 19th of March. The meeting included the King's private solicitor, the Attorney General, and the Lord Chamberlain. The King's position was that the sovereign retains ultimate authority over all private wealth held by the Crown. He cited the royal prerogative and the 1910 Crown Proceedings Act. He argued that the late Queen's trust deed is a private arrangement that can be overridden by the sovereign's will. The King then drafted a memorandum to the Duchy of Cornwall's Prince's Council, demanding that the duchy's governance structure be reviewed with a view to reclassifying its assets as Crown property. The Duchy of Cornwall was established in 1337 by Edward III. It is a private estate, not part of the Crown estate, not subject to the sovereign grant. William controls its revenues, its investments, and its 130,000 acres of land. The King's threat is to use his sovereign authority to absorb the duchy into the Crown's wider holdings, freezing William out of the £24 million annual surplus. And if that fails, the King is threatening to exclude William from the upcoming sovereign grant negotiations. The sovereign grant is reviewed every 5 years. The next review is scheduled for 2026-27. The King's private secretary has already indicated that William's team will not be invited to the preliminary discussions. The message is blunt: support the legacy fund or lose your financial independence. The history of the Duchy of Cornwall is a history of the heir defending his patch. In 2007, the then Prince Charles purchased the Llywelyn estate in Wales through the duchy, using duchy funds to renovate the 192-acre property. When William became the 24th Duke of Cornwall in September 2022, he inherited the freehold. Under the duchy's charter, the Duke has the right to charge market rent for any property occupied by a third party. William's estate manager conducted a valuation and determined that the commercial rent for Llywelyn was £120,000 per year. William's office sent an invoice to the King. The King was stunned. He had never been charged rent for a property he had bought with duchy money. William's position was non-negotiable. The duchy's assets are held in trust for the future duke, and any usage by a non-duke must be compensated. The king ultimately surrendered the lease in March 2023, vacating the property. That was the first open conflict between father and son over property rights. It was a warning shot. Camilla's legacy fund turned that warning shot into a full legal blockade. Camilla's side is not idle. The Queen Consort has built her own network of advisors over the past 2 decades. Her chief of staff, a former partner at a major London law firm, has been quietly briefing select journalists at The Telegraph and The Daily Express. The narrative being fed to the press is that William is obstructing a routine financial provision for a 76-year-old woman who has served the crown for 18 years. The briefings describe the legacy fund as a dignity trust designed to protect Camilla from being left destitute. Camilla's personal net worth is estimated at £5 million. She owns a 13-bedroom house in Wiltshire, bought in 1995. She has a jewellery collection valued at £15 million. The word destitute is absurd, but the press narrative is being deployed anyway. The king is fully backing the press push. The palace communications team has been instructed to stay silent, letting the negative stories circulate unchallenged. The framing war unfolded with precision. The Daily Telegraph ran a front-page story on the 16th of March under the headline, "Queen's Private Fortune, Heir Blocks Camilla Security Trust," sourced to senior aides close to the Queen Consort, describing the legacy fund as a modest endowment and quoting a friend of the Queen who called William's objection unnecessarily aggressive. The Daily Express followed on the 17th with "Camilla deserves a dignified future," says Palace Insider, and its editorial accused William of forgetting the compassion his mother championed. The Daily Mail, on the 18th, headlined "How the Heir Turned the Late Queen's Promise into a Weapon," was the first to mention the Protector Clause, quoting an unnamed Kensington Palace source who said the Prince of Wales will not apologise for honouring his grandmother's explicit instructions. The Guardian, on the 19th, ran "The Royal Money Machine, How a Secret Trust Fight Threatens the Monarchy's Finances," with a detailed breakdown of the sovereign grant, the duchy surpluses, and the 1993 memorandum, and quoted the Labour chair of the Public Accounts Committee, who remarked that if the royals are fighting over hundreds of millions in private, the public deserves to know how much of the Crown Estate's profits they are truly keeping. The BBC's coverage was the most restrained. Its 20th of March bulletin reported that the palace had confirmed a routine review of estate planning was underway, a line that Camilla's office had persuaded the press secretary to issue, and made no mention of the veto, the legacy fund, or the king's statutory instrument threat. The Sun, on the 21st, ran a double-page spread titled "Royal Rumble, Wills v Camilla, the £120 million showdown," with a graphic showing the valuations of Sandringham, Balmoral, the stamp collection, and the jewels, and a sidebar quoting a legal eagle who said the Protector Clause was a nuclear option designed never to be used, until now. By the end of that week, the public had been handed 4 different versions of the same event. The palace communications strategy of silence did not unify these narratives. It let each one harden. At the same time, the second front is escalating. The King's memorandum to the Prince's Council arrived on the 21st of March. The Council, established by the Duchy of Cornwall Management Act 1063, consists of the Lord Warden of the Stannaries, the Attorney General to the Prince of Wales, the Receiver General, and other senior officers. The King's memorandum argues that the Duchy's historical independence is a legal fiction, that the duchy is in reality a crown body, and that the sovereign retains the right to direct its revenues. It cites the 1337 Charter, but reinterprets the phrase "for the support of the heir" as a purpose that can be fulfilled by means other than direct transfer of income. The king proposes that the duchy's surplus be redirected into a new sovereign wealth fund, distributed at the king's discretion. William would still receive an allowance, but he would lose control. The Prince's Council met on the 25th of March. The Receiver General, who has served the duchy for 14 years, read the memorandum aloud. The Lord Warden, the Duke of Richmond, asked for a vote. The vote was unanimous. The Council rejects the King's interpretation. The Duchy of Cornwall is not a crown body. It is a private estate, held in trust for the Duke. The Council's response was sent to the palace that same evening. The King read it. He then instructed the Attorney General to begin drafting a statutory instrument that would amend the duchy's legal status. And then the ally arrives. Princess Anne is not a woman who tolerates institutional vandalism. She has been the hardest-working royal for 3 consecutive years, completing 457 engagements in 2023 alone. She was the force behind the Councillors of State Act 2022, which added her and Prince Edward to the list of royals who can deputise for the monarch. That act was passed specifically to dilute the power of non-working royals. Anne sees Camilla's legacy fund as a direct threat to the Crown's financial integrity. She has access to the original trust documents. She has been a trustee of several of the late Queen's private investment vehicles. On the 28th of March, Anne travelled to Kensington Palace. She met with William and Catherine in the private apartment. She brought a bound volume of the late Queen's financial records dating back to 1985. She walked William through the precedent set by the Queen Mother's estate. When the Queen Mother died in 2002, her entire fortune, estimated at £70 million, passed directly to the Queen. There was no carve-out for the Duchess of Cornwall, who had married Charles only 3 years earlier. The Queen Mother's will was explicit. The money goes to the Crown. Anne's message to William was simple. You have the legal right. You have the moral precedent. And you have the backing of the entire Princess Royal's office. Anne then offered to provide a sworn affidavit in any legal proceedings, confirming that the late Queen's intention was always to lock the private estate into the direct line of succession. That affidavit is now in the hands of William's solicitors. The confrontation became inevitable. The King summoned William to Windsor Castle on the 4th of April. The meeting took place in the King's private study, the same room where the Queen's funeral arrangements were finalized. The King sat behind his desk, a 17th-century walnut bureau that once belonged to George III. William stood. The King began by stating that the legacy fund was a matter of family honor. He said that Camilla had sacrificed her own privacy to serve the Crown, and that she deserved a secure future. He described William's legal objection as a betrayal of the filial bond. He then placed a single sheet of paper on the desk. It was a draft of the statutory instrument that would reclassify the Duchy of Cornwall as a Crown asset. The King said that if the veto was not withdrawn within 48 hours, the instrument would be laid before Parliament. William did not sit down. He did not raise his voice. He looked at the draft, then at his father, and he spoke the line that has now been confirmed by 2 separate palace sources. I will not stand by and watch my grandmother's life's work be carved up into a retirement fund. This estate belongs to the future of the Crown, not the demands of your wife. The room went silent. The King's face flushed. He stood up. He told William that he was making a catastrophic error. He said that the Crown's authority is indivisible and that the heir's defiance would be met with the full weight of the sovereign's prerogative. William replied that the sovereign's prerogative does not extend to overriding trust deeds signed by a monarch who reigned for 70 years. He then walked to the door. He paused. He said that his legal team would be filing an injunction in the Chancery Division of the High Court the following morning, preventing the legacy fund from being established until the matter of the Protector's consent was fully adjudicated. He left the castle. The king called Sir Michael Stevens. The statutory instrument was not laid before Parliament. The 48-hour deadline passed. The injunction was filed. The verdict is that the veto holds. The late Queen's private estate trusts remain locked into the direct line of succession. William's legal team has established that the Trust Deeds Protector Clause is watertight. The King's own solicitors, Slaughter and May, have advised the palace that challenging the deed in court would expose the monarchy to a public trial over its private wealth. The Attorney General has backed away from the statutory instrument. The Duchy of Cornwall remains independent. The Prince's Council has reaffirmed its governance structure. The sovereign grant negotiations for 2026-27 are still open, but William's team has now been formally included after a quiet intervention by the Treasury. The legacy fund is dead. Camilla's office has not issued a single statement. The press briefings about dignity have stopped. The Queen Consort has been seen at Clarence House, but she has not attended any public engagements for 12 days. The permanent cost is a fracture that cannot be repaired. The relationship between the King and the Prince of Wales is now a Cold War conducted through solicitors and private secretaries. The King has lost the trust of his heir. The Queen Consort has been publicly humiliated, her financial ambitions exposed. Princess Anne has become the unofficial mediator, but she has privately told confidants that the wound is deeper than the abdication was for the Queen Mother. The Crown's private wealth is secure, but the institution's internal unity is shattered. The Sovereign Grant Review, the management of the duchies, and the future of the monarchy's charitable work will all be conducted under the shadow of this dispute. The public will see the smiles on the balcony. They will not see the legal files stacked in the Kensington Palace safe, the draft affidavits, the trust deeds with the Protector's veto circled in red. They will not see the King sitting alone in his study, staring at the empty chair where his son stood. The Crown survived conquest, revolution, and abdication. It has never survived a family that turned its own inheritance into a weapon.